call to order this meeting of the Public Safety Local Income Tax Committee of Monroe County. Let's just go down the row here and say who's here. We'll start on my right here.
Susan Sandberg, Bloomington City Council at large.
Jeff McKim, Monroe County Council at large.
And I'm Isabel Piedmont Smith, City Council District 5 and chair of the committee.
Richard Carter, Town of Steinsville.
Jim Sims, Bloomington City Council, at-large member.
Scott Owen, Ellisville Town Council.
All right, thank you all for being here. Do we have our final committee member on Zoom today? Mr. Lucas, Stephen Lucas is helping us out from the council office.
I don't believe any committee members are on Zoom at the moment. I hadn't heard that anyone was planning to join that way, so hopefully we'll have the other folks join us here shortly.
Okay.
Yeah, I thought Trent said he was going to be here. So.
All right, may just be running late. All right, let me just summarize our agenda for today. We're going to be considering the one application we received for public safety local income tax revenues by a qualified service provider. That's from the Monroe County Fire Protection District. That applicant will have 10 minutes to present. I believe Chief Dillard is here to present their request, and then we will have an opportunity for questions and discussion among the committee. And then if there would be a motion to fund the request or partially fund the request, we can consider that. Although actually let's do that after item 4, which is the initial discussion of recommendations to the Monroe County Local Income Tax Council, so that we can first get an overview of the sums available potentially to the QSP. So we'll discuss the PSAP rate for 2024. It's very early yet, but unfortunately we're working with an August 1st deadline for any changes to the tax rate, so we have to work with incomplete numbers. So we will consider the request put forward by Central Dispatch, which is our public safety answering point, PSAP, and then also consider how much we have in reserves to fund part of the PSAP request. Then we will consider any distributions to the qualified service provider that we heard from in item 3 of the agenda, and then we will discuss the total PSLIT tax rate for 2024. Then if there's any remaining items outstanding, we might discuss scheduling another meeting. I hope that's not going to be necessary. Then we'll have an opportunity for any other business or comments from members, and then we will adjourn. And I see Monroe County Councilor Deckard has arrived, so thank you for joining us. We will go ahead and move to consideration of the application by the Monroe County Fire Protection District. So Chief Dillard, and I think we have copies of his presentation here in front of us, so he'll help us follow along. And I think you were told it was 10 minutes, so.
Yeah, and I'll be done under that, I promise.
All right, thank you.
First off, thanks for the opportunity. Received the email Monday saying we were the only applicant. Please be here today, and happy to be here. Hate to be the only applicant. But just a brief history real quick. The fire district's roots date back to 1970, back when they were township fire departments. In 1987, Perry-Clear Creek Fire District was formed when Perry and Clear Creek townships formed the fire district. Things were pretty much on hold for a couple decades until 2017, when Indian Creek Township's trustee, Vicki Sorensen, approached about Indian Creek Township joining. Figured out the steps to do that, and on January 1st, 2019, Indian Creek Township became a part of the fire district, and it was renamed Monroe Fire Protection District. The same year, Polk and Salt Creek Townships began contracting for fire and EMS services. And in 2021, there was a merger with Bloomington and Van Buren Townships, followed in 2022 by the merger of Benton, Washington Townships. At this time, 7 townships are a part of the fire district. 2 townships are contracted with the district for a total of 9 of Monroe County's townships. The fire district covers 317 square miles, 45,000 estimated population, It's difficult to get an exact population for you. The census doesn't break it down to fire districts, so we have to take townships, extract the municipalities, so it's right in that ballpark. 18,638 housing units, and 32% of Monroe County's population. First thing we do is provide fire suppression. We do provide marine firefighting and rescue for Lake Monroe and several other bodies of water. EMS services probably makes up about 60 to 70% of our response. We are a hazardous materials team for the region. We provide technical rescue for a variety of things. The district also provides fire prevention. We install smoke detectors, do public CPR trainings, fire investigations, and home safety checks. In the last couple of years, really stepped up our community risk reduction program. Deputy Chief Steve Coover is involved in a lot of different committees, doing a lot of different things, so that's that. As far as the request goes, we have a bid for a fire station in Washington Township. That bid came back at $676,700. This is for a building similar to what was built in Clear Creek in 1989 and lasted us until 2014 when we built a more permanent structure. So we got about 30 years out of the fire station that we're looking to build up in Washington Township. And in that 30-year window, the district has a plan in place to be able to modify that structure as we did in Clear Creek Township 9 years ago. So Washington Township, when they merged, the initial plan was for Washington Township to build a station and then basically deed it to the fire district. COVID hit, prices went through the roof, and they were unable to afford that structure. They had $300,000 they had collected for their fire service fund. They handed that money over to the fire district's donation fund, earmarked specifically for the purpose of a fire station in Washington Township. So that money is sitting there for that sole purpose. We are dedicating $150,000 in the cumulative fund budget for 2024. The long-term plan would be, without this funding, we would do that each year until we had enough money saved up to complete the project. Could be 3 years down the road. Costs will go up. We'll see how that goes. But hopefully, with your approval, we'd be able to get the $226,700 that's needed to get this project completed immediately. So one question that was asked was, is the fire district at their maximum property tax levy? The short answer for that is no, but let me explain why. The first merger that involved Indian Creek was relatively small as far as staffing goes. We added 2 part-time firefighters to that station 24/7, was a pretty small amount. In 2021, when we merged the 2 combination departments, Van Buren and Bloomington Township, we increased staffing substantially so that we could reach NFPA standards. In 2021, a total of 35 firefighters were added to the fire district. And let me tell you, as much of a benefit on the ground, it was overwhelming as a fire district to train that many new firefighters to merge those 3 departments' operations and get the job done. So we met with DLGF in 2021 to discuss the 2022 budget, in which our maximum levy is established. We explained that problem and what our goals were long-term to meet the NFPA standards with staffing. And it was determined that we would set that maximum levy, but we would hire those firefighters at a reasonable pace. So over the next 3 years, we still have 22 firefighters to add personnel-wise to the district. So that would bring us to our maximum levy. That is why we're not currently at that. As far as the fire district response, these numbers are provided by Central Emergency Dispatch. In 2022, the district responded to 4,414 calls. So far this year, we responded to 2,199. This question really is based on, does the district respond? And the next slide will show you that you can look at the aid given information to extract that. In 2022, the district gave aid 125 times, and they received aid 26 times. And in 2023, year to date, we've given aid 88 times and received aid 64 times. Those numbers have increased because of a recent automatic aid agreement with the Town of Ellettsville Fire Department, in which we're using automated vehicle location, AVL, to send the closest fire units to calls. Now, it's disproportionate right now. It's about 2 to 1. Ellettsville is coming on a call with us 2 times for every 1 that we're responding with them. But we've seen a drastic decrease in response times because of this, and it's really nice to see the closest resources responding. So, as far as measurable criteria, if you look at this picture of Monroe County, you don't necessarily notice the obvious difference in fire coverage. The highlighted areas show 5 miles from every fire station in Monroe County. The image on the left is without the Washington Township station. The image on the right is with it. You'll notice the difference in the north portion of the image in the very center. The next slide shows you Washington Township itself. Right now, there is no portion of the township within 5 miles of any fire station. Building the station there would put the vast majority of the population within that range. So then back to the last slide. Well, it's the next slide, but it's the same slide. Now, if you look at that northern image, you can see the area along that I-69 corridor where there's some coverage gaps there. Really, the coverage gaps that will remain will be the northeast side, the northern portion of Benton, and then Salt and Polk townships. Benefits. So those 2,000 people in that Washington Township slide would immediately see their response times cut in half or more. Additional staffed fire station in the northern part of the county is going to benefit everyone. If there's an incident in the northeast side of Ellettsville or the northern side of Bloomington, you could potentially see those resources there. They'll be available. Also give immediate access to the northern 1/3 of Interstate 69 in Monroe County. Right now, we've got an emergency access gate on the southern end covered by Station 39. The center section's covered by Station 22 and Bloomington City. And then that northern portion right now, really the closest unit that can respond is Bloomington City Station 2, right there by Texas Roadhouse and those hotels. So this puts us in the northern portion and gives us access within a minute to get on the interstate for any accidents or hazardous materials issues. And again, additional resources to Monroe County. I know none of you are a stranger to hearing that we need more firefighters, we need more police. This is an opportunity to add some more firefighters to the county. And you know, the equipment that'll go to this station is currently sitting in some of our fire stations, but when they respond on a call in one piece of an apparatus, the other apparatus is sitting there. By adding a fire station with additional personnel, we can roll that apparatus and it can be utilized immediately. And then there's always the redundancies. The more calls that we can take as a district and as a county, for instance, the storms that we've encountered over the last month. You know, the fire district alone in the one storm on the Friday evening had 66 calls as a result of that storm alone, spread amongst those 7 stations. So having an 8th there splits that call volume. It keeps someone in service. And the more strategically located these stations are, the less likely that all of the stations could be impacted by an event like that. Also allows for another public use space. There's nothing in Washington Township for the public to use. If someone needed to have a meeting there formally, right now I think they have a small church that they utilize for meetings, but you know, the firehouse could be another public gathering area there. And then as of late, you are all familiar with the cooling and warming stations. You know, this is another opportunity to use them up there. So that is it. Did I make it in 10 minutes?
Yes, thank you so much, Chief Dillard. Are there questions for Chief Dillard regarding the Monroe Fire Protection District's request? Yes, Councilmember Sims.
Thank you, and thank you for the report, Chief Dillard. In your 2023 budget proposal, is what I'm looking at on page 17. Station 26 is what we're talking about today, is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, and the proposed budget is $676,000 and $676,700. If I may ask, as part of your budget proposal, what revenue stream did you foresee to cover that budget?
Yeah.
And I'm assuming this was done before.
Yeah, so that proposal
PSLIT.
includes PSLIT. There's $300,000 from Washington Township. There's $150, which is from the cumulative fire fund tax. That's another type of property tax that the fire district levies. And then $226,700 from the PSLIT. In the proposal without, you'll see just the 150, not including the 300 because the 450 is not going to complete the job. So it would be a few years of that 150 being earmarked for that and set aside.
Okay. And your year-end or end-of-year financial for 2022, down at the bottom, you have general fund cash balance. And January 15th, restricted donations. I guess my question there is, those restricted donations are restricted to what? Is that something you can share with us real quick?
Yeah, so those are fun. The bulk of that is this fire station. And the bulk of that dollar amount is this $300,000 from Washington Township. So what happens is the fire district has a donation fund. You can contribute to the donation fund out of goodwill. You just donate $20 and you don't earmark it, and it can be used for buying supplies or anything that the fire district would appropriate. If you want to donate money and make sure that it's solely dedicated to a sole purpose, the statute says that you'd simply provide us with documentation stating that. And in Washington Township's case, they donated $300,000 specifically for the construction of a fire station.
Okay, so the $300,000 that you propose for the Washington Township Park is included in this restricted fund.
Correct.
So in essence, well, it's the request, so. And I believe, what, $23,800?
Yeah, there's
bucks, if
20-some thousand and change from Van Buren Township for the use on an ambulance service.
Yes,
And then the rest of it is pretty small.
okay. Madam Chair, I just have one more, if that's okay.
Yes, please, go ahead.
Thank you. Chief, again, on your page 15, I believe it is, the end of your year financial, your cash balances, is that CUM, is that cumulative?
I'm sorry, I could not hear you.
The CUM, I'm sorry.
Yeah, the
CUM.
cumulative fund.
Okay, and that's at $903,000 and some change?
That's correct.
Okay, and the rainy day cash fund, and that equals, if my math is correct, roughly $1.6 million.
Yeah.
So is any of that eligible to be used for some of this request that you guys have?
It will be in the future. So part of the merger was, we had this 6-month gap where you don't get your settlement for that first year. So in January of 2021, we essentially were living off of what was formerly Perry Clear Creek's cash fund. So we had to borrow some money to pay the staff and fund supplies and equipment until that first settlement. Initially, it was forecast that we would probably have to do that every 6 months for the first 2 years, but we kind of tried to cut back, and we were able to do that just one time for the first year. So we're trying to keep that amount there where we'll never have to borrow funds again, and that'll probably be a year and a half, 2 years from now, will be there secure. But any funds that we would spend out of that now could result in us needing to borrow funds at the end of November or December to pay the bills until we receive December settlement.
Okay, so if you ended up having to borrow money, it would be $226,000 less.
Absolutely.
So that's what we're talking about.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yep.
All right, Counselor McKim, you had a question?
Thanks, Chief, for the presentation. Just wanted to see what would if we were to grant this $226,000, what would be the schedule for construction and actually being able to use the new fire station?
Yeah, so something that we've been looking at is if, obviously this opportunity came up again, about a month ago, but prior to that, we were looking at taking this project, splitting it into 2 phases, getting some site work done with the cash that we had received from Washington Township, and then sitting on that site until we had enough money saved up to build the fire station. The problem with that is county ordinances, building requirements change. So if we sit on that for some time, some of the site work that we complete may have to be redone to meet the standards at the time that we were to build the fire station. So right now, we have the packet as Washington Township had originally planned as one sweep, site work, construction, and everything. That's what we would prefer. But worst case scenario, we're looking at splitting that into phases and then working through it on an annual basis. Really, every year we would need to get the plans reviewed to make sure they were current and progress a little bit at a time.
But in the best possible scenario, if you did receive all the money you wanted, how soon could you actually start using the fire station?
I mean, we would just simply need fire district board approval to proceed with obtaining bids, because these are, now out of date. Get new bids and get moving. Yeah.
And I know it's a pretty simple construction.
Oh, it's very simple construction, yeah. Essentially, we would probably be at the excavator's mercy, if you will. Whenever they could get to us is probably when we would be able to break ground.
Thank you.
Yep.
Counselor Deckard?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I have a few questions here, if I could, to just kind of take me through this as it makes sense. Just even for public watching, how long have we roughly, and I'm sure this is more pertinent to the Washington Township community, but how long have we roughly been talking about some sort of solution in Washington Township similar to this, to your knowledge?
Decades.
Predating your service, right?
Oh, absolutely. So most of the township fire departments in Monroe County were created in the early 70s. There was some legislation change that allowed for it in the late 60s, 1970. Some of the stations came along, but stations like Washington, Polk, and Salt Creek never followed through or created their own fire station. Those three townships alone are the only three townships in the county that don't have a firehouse.
And as I looked at your presentation, I was thinking collectively of the history I've observed and sort of that timeline that you laid out, that 1970 to current. And if I understand this right, if we would do this, as much as this committee can contribute along with what you've got listed as far as dollars, essentially with some give or take, this means for folks in Washington Township, quicker response time to those homes, cut in half or more, pretty soon. By pretty soon for government standards, I mean, within whatever that means. We all know up here that means better than worse. If we don't do it, we're talking about 3+
Potentially, absolutely.
3+ years.
Yeah.
So that if we were to do it for those family, and of course they think about that more than those who are maybe not in those areas, unless they have, such as myself, family and grandchildren and people. We're talking about a quicker response time. This committee could do that this year.
Correct. Yeah, it could be done within a calendar year easily.
Okay. I guess the last question I have, you all have done a lot in the last couple years, and that's gone fairly well from what I can tell from folks that are responding to it. What's the sentiment you pick up from Washington Township, your folks there, your residents, et cetera, that you hear about this? What are you hearing kind of on the ground about the buzz on this or the need?
In the last few months, there's been a lot more chatter. The phones ring a lot, asking, hey, what's going on with this? We've been in the district for a year and a half now, and we've yet to see a fire station. And I have to explain to them, hey, $300,000 doesn't build a firehouse, and it takes time to substantially save up that money and maintain those cash balances. But when I tell them, hey, we're looking at potentially breaking ground soon, we're looking at potentially finding additional sources to build the fire station itself, they just want to see some progress.
Okay. Yeah. That's the questions I had. I'm a historical context type person. I've watched this stuff kind of closely, and I like to hear the chief talk about it a little bit, particularly in a committee where we have people that represent folks from border to border, and I love that. So thank you, Chief.
Thank you. Mr. Carter, you have a question?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Chief Dillon, just a little, I guess, follow-up with that is, what is the current ISO rating in Washington Township? And will putting a station there lower the ISO rating, which will in turn save the
Yeah,
people insurance money.
that's a good point. Yeah, by default, since they're outside of 5 miles, they're a 10. With a fire station there, they would move to 4 as soon as the fire station was staffed and ready to go.
And do you know what kind of savings that would be potentially for the homeowners in that area?
It's really hard to say. The research that we've done as a fire district says that in Indiana, you seem to get the best residential premiums at a 5 or below. But every company varies. In the hundreds of insurance companies, some use ISO, some use zip code loss. It just depends. I know that there were a few folks in Perry Clear Creek when we obtained the 4. They maybe saved $300-400 a year on homeowners insurance for a $200,000 home. Now, the biggest thing that factors into that is for the fire district, you don't have to be within 1,000 feet of a fire hydrant. We have what's called water shuttle credit, which means that we have demonstrated that we have apparatus capable of hauling enough water to supply a fire. So the 1,000-foot requirement for a hydrant does not exist. You simply have to be within 5 miles of one of our fire stations.
Any other questions from committee members? Yes, Mr. Oldham.
2 quick questions. Have you looked at borrowing this $300,000 and amortizing that over a period of time? Because relatively little.
We've talked about it, have not looked at that yet. Again, this project, we've looked at the ways that we can fund it without any additional costs, interest being one of those. Yes, it's definitely possible, but again, it's just more dollars.
Okay. And forgive me, I don't know the answer to this. Has there been a large demographic shift in Washington Township?
No, the population that this would benefit has been there for some time.
Right, and so this has been on the drawing board for years. There's not, and again, forgive me because I really don't know the answer, there's not been some huge housing complex moving up there that is driving an emergency need for this station versus where we've been at the status quo for years.
No, you're correct.
Okay. Finally, I know you're investigating, funding, starting your own ambulance service. I don't even know how to term it.
Mm-hmm.
Would there be a reason to assume that an ambulance would be based at this facility? Or is
It'd
there
be
not
too
sufficient
premature
call
for me to
volume there
say that there would be a
justify it?
staffed ambulance there. What we've done is we've secured 4 ambulances.
Mm-hmm.
Initially, the plan was to put 2 of those in service to act in a reserve capacity for IU Health. So when the county was out of ambulance service, instead of waiting for another county, the fire district would be dispatched. The 3rd ambulance would be for special events to alleviate some of that workload because there's constantly an ambulance tied up somewhere for a special event. And the 4th was to be in reserve so that we could properly maintain those. Recent statistics show that we might need 3 of those on the street with 1 in reserve.
So you have an agreement with IU Health to do that?
No, there's no agreement with IU Health. This would be through Monroe County Central Emergency Dispatch. When we're out of ambulance services, the nearest ambulance would be dispatched.
Okay. And would there be, you receive funding for doing that, or how does
We
that
would
work?
become a billing agency like most other ambulance services.
So you'd be billing for that service?
That is correct.
All right. Well, I have a couple of questions. So, Chief Dillard, you said if you do not get the PSLIT funding, you would dedicate $150,000 of the cumulative fund or cum cap fund each year in order to get to the amount you need. But then you've also been talking about 3 years. But so the current need is $226,700. Maybe it'll go up, certainly, but it doesn't seem like it would take more than 2 years at that rate?
Well, the first year is already included. That first 150 is included to get to the 226. So in 2024, the district would be contributing 150 out of the cumulative fund. So that year is included in getting to that 226. So the second year, we would get to the, that gets you to, $76,700 in need, and then that 3rd year is when it would be fully funded.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite follow that. So you have $300,000 from Washington Township.
Right now.
You have dedicated Oh, okay, for next year. you
Correct.
dedicate 150,000. So then, okay, I see what you mean. All right.
Okay.
It's 24 funds.
You understand? And the 150, I mean, we would certainly throw more at that when we can, but all the other budget lines that you see in there are consistently utilized. They're paying a mortgage on a fire station that we have, they're paying loans on fire trucks that we have, and the personal protective equipment, it's got to be replaced every 10 years. We've got it on a replacement schedule. That's how much we need to do that. So that fund is constantly pretty much fully utilized.
Okay, my other question, and I don't know if you would have the answer, it might, somebody from dispatch. So I understand you had 4,414 calls in 2022. How does that compare with the total calls in the county? Do we have that figure? Do you know?
I think the city of Bloomington runs between 5,000 and 6,000. Ellettsville's running 2,500, 3,000, I believe. So it's, what, roughly a third of the total calls, I think. Sorry, am I wrong?
Is there somebody here from dispatch who can answer that, or not? If you can't, that's all right.
I don't have the numbers off the top of my head. I know that law enforcement accounts for about 2/3 of our call volume, maybe even higher than that. And then I think it's fair to say split into third with that remainder would be what Monroe Fire responds to. Because we're talking about City Fire, IU Health EMS, and Bloomington Fire. I'm sorry, Monroe Fire Protection District.
All right, thank you. Mr. Oldham, you had a question?
So Dustin, I know you've got it set up, Chief Diller, I apologize, that it's the automatic paging where when the run comes out, the honker goes off and sets off, you know, your engines, your trucks, your chiefs, whatever else. And again, through no fault of anybody else, it's just the way it's set up. But when I noticed looking at your call volume earlier today, you're showing a truck and a chief going, but the other three assets never appear to leave the bay, but yet they get counted as runs. So I don't know to what degree that's call volume, non-call volume, or how that's actually working.
So what do you mean? I guess I kind of got
Again,
lost.
if you look at just the first one on the sheet, and I didn't bring it because I didn't think it was going to be relevant except here, so that we can look at apples to apples, the first run on the sheet shows 5 different pieces of apparatus being sent on that call. But yet only 2 of them have an arrival time and an end time, so apparently the other 3 weren't needed on that because it's set as a computer.
Okay.
So it's dispatched automatically through no fault of Monroe Fire territory. So it's not them playing games. It's just it gives us an erratic pattern of when we can track runs. Fire and law enforcement track calls differently.
Correct.
Fire tracks it by apparatus sent. Law enforcement tracks it by call, no matter how many type of pieces of equipment are sent.
No, so the fire department does track that way. That single incident.
Well, through central dispatch, I apologize, the numbers she ran.
Yeah. All 5 of those apparatus would be on one call.
Right, but did all 5 of them actually make the run?
Yes, all 5 apparatus that you saw on that call would be dispatched. What is likely happened with what you're referring to is a unit's arrived on scene and disregarded the additional units. So they
Right.
never marked on scene.
So they never essentially made the run. So instead of 5 runs, and again, we're getting very complicated, I get that. It's 2 pieces of apparatus made the run, the other 3 weren't needed, so they were disregarded.
Correct, but it is counted as one run on that sheet.
It
doesn't matter how many
unfortunately,
apparatus.
her totals showed every piece of apparatus counting toward that total.
No, it would be per call.
Okay.
Yeah, those are 911 calls. What you're seeing is apparatus attached to that call. That's how those numbers are tracked.
Okay.
And they match our numbers directly from our software as well. Sarah, you want to speak on that?
I'm trying to pull up the 2022 annual stats. My phone's not being so compliant here. Okay,
And
so
could
the
you
to-
please state your name for the record?
I am Sarah Taylor, Director
you.
of Civilian Operations. So when we're talking about Fire department only calls for service in 2022. The total is 11,717. That includes Bean Blossom, Bloomington, Ellettsville, and Monroe Fire Protection District. And of that, 4,400 are Monroe Fire. When we compare that to law enforcement, the total for law enforcement throughout the entire county is 92,000. So fire is about 10% of our call volume, and Monroe Fire makes up 4,000 of those 11,700.
Thank you very
Does that
much.
clarify?
All right, other questions? Counselor Deckard?
I had an additional. I remember a few years ago up on Dittamore Road. I've heard, by the way, I've heard that road said about 60 different ways, so I apologize to anyone living there if I've got it wrong by your way. But up on Dittamore Road, the tornado that went through, and I got to meet some of the residents. I guess my question to you is, let's say I live on that road. Let's say I'm out in my yard, and let's say I have an issue with my mower, my riding mower catches on fire. It's now got something else on fire. And needless to say, my wife, who's much wiser than me, calls you all to get help. If I'm on Dittamore Road, under current circumstances now, how long do you think I'm out in that yard before someone could get to me to help the home, help me from the current existing fire state? If you were ballparking, Chief, and if you need to get back to me, that's 100% okay. I don't expect you to know that, but I'm just trying to get a ballpark. Me, same place as some of those tornado victims from, I think it was 2019.
Well, at the time, the Ellisville automatic aid would not have been in play. Now, you're probably looking at 10 minutes from this site location. You're probably looking at 3 to 4.
Okay.
I mean, Dittamore's spread, so it depends on
Yeah.
where we're at on Dittamore, but I would say that's probably fair.
So essentially, a
Richard,
truck from Ellettsville is what's coming to me under automatic aid, assuming that that's going okay, and I probably got a 10-minute, you think?
Correct.
It's pretty good. That's pretty quick by Ellettsville standards. So I appreciate that, and I'm trying to get my head around those distances, because that is a large territory up there. And those roads wind, and we don't want to make an accident along the way too. So thank you.
All right, any other questions for Chief Dillard? All right, well, thank you very much. And we will move on in our agenda to initial discussion of recommendations to the Monroe County Local Income Tax Council. So we first need to consider the budget proposal from the Central Dispatch Policy Board. Is there anybody here to speak to that, or?
I don't believe we have anyone from the policy board. I would be happy to answer the questions I can, and I know City Attorney Mike Rooker is also here, and I believe he was more involved with the policy board discussions than I was. Jeff Underwood is also on our call and can answer questions as well.
All right, so I'm trying to find the page in my packet here to get the bottom line. I believe the request, is it $3,765,828?
Page 21 in your packet has the proposed 2024 dispatch budget to be funded through, I believe, a combination of the PSLIT and reserves.
Right,
And
and this is significant increase over last year. And it looks like most of that is in personnel services. I know they're trying to get up to full staffing. Mr. Rooker, is there anything that you can add to explain the increased request?
And I should also note, apologies, Ms. Taylor is also here from dispatch, and she may be able to speak to the budget.
Yes, Ms. Taylor?
Yeah, I think Michael Rooker, City Attorney, I think the Director of Communications or Director of Civilian Operations for Dispatch would be better suited probably to explain that. So.
Very good. Ms. Taylor?
Apologies.
We only have, again, Sarah Taylor, Director of Civilian Operations, we only have two major big spends, and only one of them is located or would come out of the PSAP funds. So that is our capital outlay. That's the $35,000 line under 54510. And to explain what that is, that would be encryption for the remaining 7 of our 9 dispatch consoles. That allows us to listen to any covert ops or anything that any of our law enforcement partners feel should not be broadcasted on a public channel, that any Joe Schmo can dial into the radio and listen to what they're doing.
Okay, thank you. But I am looking at the personnel services category, and it looks like the 2022 actuals were about 1.3 million, and the proposed is 2.27 million. So is that additional positions, or?
The proposed is assuming full staffing. We were not full staffed, and we're not anywhere close in 2022. We, with our current projections, we will be fully staffed spring of 2024.
Not a moment too soon.
Fingers crossed.
Thank you. That's what I thought. Are there any comments or questions about the PSAP budget proposal before we talk about reserves? Yes, Councilor McKim.
I guess my questions probably are mostly about reserves, but just to be clear, the personnel budget, what is the difference in the personnel budget between 2023 and 2024? The paperwork we received only had 2022 for comparison.
The only difference would be the 5% increase that we're assuming would be granted to city employees for 2024.
Okay, so you're not adding any new positions from 2024 over
Correct.
2023?
There's
Okay.
nothing new in that.
And what's your current vacancy rate?
Hold on one moment, please. We have 32 dispatch FTEs allotted. Our vacancy is right now is at 20. We are about to hire 6 at the end of this month, 6 in the winter. Hopefully promote a couple folks to our empty supervisor positions, and then hire the remaining dispatchers in early 2024.
So you have 20 vacancies right now? Did I
We
hear
have
that
20 FTEs filled, so we have
20 filled.
a total of 9 vacancies out of our 41 complete allotted FTEs.
Okay, sorry, I heard it the wrong way. Okay, so 9 vacancies then.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions on the budget proposal? All right. Well, then let's talk about reserves. And I don't know if Mr. Underwood would be the one to let us know how our reserves are looking for funding PSAP, or who would like to speak to that?
Good afternoon, Jeff Underwood, City Controller. I don't have a lot to report right now. We're kind of in a perfect storm as far as the funding for PSLIT and for PSAP. Due to a number of factors, we ran right up against the deadline to get the budget agreed to between the city and county staff and present that to the Dispatch Policy Board and forward that along to you. We do have that budget broke out between PSLIT dollars and E911 dollars, so we've kind of presented a maximum amount. The other issue is that you all have to approve a rate prior to us knowing what next year's dollars are going to be. So in the short term, we'll be working with the county to look at reserves on both city side and the county side. We're assuming that the recommendation would to approve last year's rate, and then if there's any shortfall out of that will be funded between the city and the county, which is what is called for in the interlocal, that any funding shortfall would be split evenly between the 2 units and would be available to be paid out of either PSLIT reserves or any other funds that the city or county might have. So Sorry that I don't have more information. We will be working with the county in the coming weeks to look at what reserves amounts are available and work to have a resolution of what that might be. I will say that, you know, last year the city dedicated a big portion of the PSLIT reserves that we had on hand at the end of 2021, and that we anticipated that we would use the majority of those during 2023, and then would move to utilizing county reserves. We also are with an agreement with the county that we will continue to update both sides, numbers available, and utilize reserves as much as possible, while keeping a sufficient balance in reserve, so that if there's some interruption on the funding, the city would have funds available, would not have to borrow from other funds to pay for that. So there was a significant drop in the amount that you approved for PSAP because of the use of those reserves for the 2023 budget. So again, you know, we're about halfway through the year. We'll be analyzing where we're at standing that way, as well as what's available from 2022 for city and county.
Thank you, Mr. Underwood. So, I mean, can you give us a ballpark of what's available, or end 2022 numbers or anything, so that we have an idea of what there is to work with?
Well, based on the projections, the city would have used up the majority of their reserves by the end of this year, which I believe was about $1.2 million, and I can't speak for the county side of things.
Well, there's not much information to go on. Councilor McKim. But thank you, Mr. Underwood. I know it's a difficult period to try to get those figures. Yes, Mr.
Yeah,
McKim.
it's clear that the timing for this process, you know, through no fault of anyone here, doesn't work particularly well with the state's other processes for providing information. I don't have the exact figure in front of me, but I have been informed that the county reserves on the county side are, you know, possibly up to $2 million. I believe Mr. Underwood recommended, but please tell me if I got that wrong, that we keep the same PSAP rate for this year, for 2024, that we have for 2023. Is that?
Yeah, I believe in talking with Michael Rooker and Jeff McKim, Jeff Cockrell, that was their and Stephen Lucas as well. Given that, you know, the lack of information and the fact that the system is very broken, is that we probably would recommend adopting the same rate for 2024. We can always amend that
In the spring,
up or down after the fact, and I imagine we would true that up because, one, we'll know reserves and how much we want to spend, and two, what the actual distributions are, so that it can then fall to the other 4 units, because obviously all 4 units can use as much PSLIT money for their operations, either capital or operating, as we can get our hands on. So that would be my recommendation. I'll let the attorneys jump in as well, but that we would come back after the numbers are known, after we've had an agreement with the county, to what we're going to utilize reserve-wise, either through the city and county or some combination, and then we can readjust that.
And that's also my recommendation. I would not support going any higher than the current PSAP lit rate than we had for last year, and I think there's enough reserves that we don't have to. And like Mr. Underwood said, we could always make an adjustment next year if there were actually a serious imbalance. But at this point, given all the information we have, I don't think there is going to be. And then just to remind everybody, the spreadsheet that Mr. Lucas sent out assumes the entire budget would come out of the PSAP lit, and assumes no reserves at all. So we would want to, before we make an adjustment or a recommendation, that number would be adjusted back down to, I think, what we had what we had already approved in 2023.
So I have a question about the process. So if we put in the full PSAP budget request as coming from the 2024 PSLIT Is there a way to, so if the local income tax council decided that that was going to be the 3.765 million, which corresponds to a 9.2% or 36.8% of the PSLIT, can that be changed later if we decide, we're actually getting more money from the state next year and we have some money in reserves we'd like to use instead? Is that an adjustment that can be made later?
Was your question whether the rate for PSAP can be adjusted? I'm sorry, I was trying to update the spreadsheet as you were talking. The rate for PSAP has to be set by August 1st under the new deadline. So we would be looking at updating the rate for 2025 before August 1st of next year. I'm not sure.
Okay, so I'm sorry, my question was kind of convoluted, but that was basically my question, is whether it can be adjusted later if we find that we don't need the full amount from the 2024 PSAP.
Unless
Yes,
Mr. Rucker disagrees,
No,
I think you're looking
just,
at.
Just to answer in a word, I think the answer is no.
Okay.
So,
Gotcha. All right, so, yeah, so
And
it
unless
is
there-
kind of a,
Unless there's additional guidance that comes from the state on these deadlines, everything I've heard from the DLGF attorneys is that the action of adjusting the allocation rate to dispatch is subject to that August 1st deadline. So if we don't do that this year, certainly by next August the 1st, 2024, you could adjust the rate, but that would take effect 2025.
so if we end up using some reserves next year, then we would just be generating more reserves in the PSAP, really.
So, right, if the total, Mr. Underwood can
Well,
speak to
just to
that.
clarify, that's why we're recommending that we adopt last year's rate and not fund the full amount of the budget as shown in the spreadsheet. So it would be at the, Mr. Lucas, can you remember, it was 2 point?
Last year's rate was set to yield $2,585,000 off of
So
revenue of.
Yeah, so that's our recommendation, is that we would maintain that rate. So we would not be requesting an adjustment in the full rate for the full amount.
Yeah, otherwise, I apologize.
Okay, well, then I misunderstood the recommendation. Yes, Councilor McKim?
Yeah, otherwise we'd just be continuing to generate reserves upon reserves, and we need that money. I mean, I think that the other units all need that money for other public safety needs, not sitting in a bank account.
Okay, I misinterpreted because I was looking at the chart where that 3.765 is already filled in, but.
If you look at the last page of your packet, the worksheet that we've normally used to adjust the rate, last year's allocation rate for PSAP was 0.063% of the 0.25%, and so that's what would remain the same. The 2024 numbers, again, were placeholders using the full dispatch budget with PSLIT dollars plus reserves, so I don't think anyone was recommending that. It was just a placeholder. This committee in the past has typically voted on the dispatch budget and the total dollar amount. So last year, $2,585,000. But because we don't know what that number will end up being for next year, and we also don't know the total revenue estimate from the state, there's no way I can back into a rate to tell you. So if this committee wanted to leave the 0.063%, I believe that's what Mr. Underwood is recommending, that's what county staff have recommended, then there's really no action by the tax council needed to adjust that. It's just we're not sure what that will yield.
All right, and we don't need the dollar amount. We can just say the rate will stay the same.
Correct.
Percentage going to PSAP
Correct.
will stay the same. Okay.
And that percentage, again, would be 0.063% of the 0.25% total tax rate.
Are there other questions about the PSAP budget or rate? Okay. Sorry, hopping back and forth here between my agenda. Well, then let us move on to discussion of our application from Monroe Fire Protection District and whether or not to take additional funds off the top of the PSLIT revenues to fund that request in part or in whole. Are there any comments, ideas, suggestions? Yes, Councilor McKinley.
I mean, I plan to at least make a motion to fund it in full. I think this request has been discussed in the community for a long time. I think members of both county and city governments have expressed support for Washington Township having a fire station. I think that Chief Dillard's numbers are well justified and I think the project has been kept to the minimum necessary to fulfill the requirements. I think this is going to add to the public safety of people throughout the county, and so I'm in support of fully funding the request.
Other comments, Councilor Deckard.
It's probably going to come as no shock based on some of my questions, but I likewise have that same sentiment. I'll be very candid. I represent, as well as Councilor McKim, I represent the people that live in Washington Township, just as I represent the people that live on the south side of the county, east side of the county, west side of the county, and downtown city of Bloomington and Ellettsville, and I'm proud of that. And I look holistically at what we offer and what we have offered from the moment I was a child in this community, 1977 to current. I look at that and think about that, and the one continual thing I think about is what the expectations of the public tend to be, particularly on that day when they are waiting for that call to respond and they've not thought through the philosophies of fire or law enforcement or whatever it is, but they need that help right then, right at that moment. And they generally don't see borders. They don't think about those philosophies. They think about their loved one. And I think about our neighbors and friends all throughout this community. And when I say that, I say it generically. And I think gradually over time, the definition of where people live due to housing costs or you name it, or where they want to be or the amenities they want, mean that they expect in a location some services and good services at that. And whether that be their broadband, whether that be the water, the safety of those things, but particularly their fire service. And I think the district has complemented that in the community very effectively. And again, when I meet with residents, I hear from folks, whether they're, you name it, they expect the same things. And I'll never forget, I was going door to door in Harrodsburg one time and talking with folks. And a person was confused about fire this and fire that, but here was this lady's bottom line. She wanted to make sure that when she called, someone came. And that's fundamentally, I think, what we're talking about. And I look at the Washington Township changes due to the highway. I look at where things have been and those expectations of those residents, who we all know and hear from in varying degrees. And so to me, this seems like a continued complement to what we can do. Here's the one thing I really love, and then I'll be quiet because I know other comments need to be made. I love the fact that when we look at, when particularly disasters are awful, but when we look at who's responding in Steinsville or in Bloomington or what have you, I love the notion that our folks, you just see those trucks and they bring hope. And I kind of see that in Washington Township, which is my questions were trying to allude to. That is not the most straightaway territory of driving that anyone ever invented. I remember heading out to those Dittamore Road tornado homes and thinking, you know, coming around these corners, trucks going around these corners, all that takes time. And so anyway, I just see this as an extension of that, and I'm going to be inclined for that because I represent those people, just as I represent people that are a block from here living. And that, I'm duty bound to always try to find a way, particularly if there's money now.
Thank you. I see Mr. Underwood has his hand raised. Do you have something to add, some information that would help us out, Mr. Underwood?
Well, I'm going to speak from two different hats. My first hat as city controller is obviously not speaking to the need to the fire station, but as my hat as city controller is, this has no benefit to the city of Bloomington. It's a station that may be very much needed. And in fact, my son and his family live right across the street from where it would be located, so I would wholeheartedly support that. But again, I think if this is really a county need that it not be supported by this group, that the county and Ellisville or others units that get money, if they want to contribute towards that, they do have the ability to issue debt. Their rates, property tax rates, have gone up significantly over time. It's very costly now for county residents to have that service, and I don't believe that there's a benefit to city residents that we should see the city losing the funding, which would be about 49% of the request would come out of city dollars, so I will say that. Also, in my second hat, I'm a lifelong non-city county resident. I live in Benton Township, and I don't expect the city to fund my fire protection. I expect that we, the citizens of the county and Benton Township, would pay what was necessary to fund that, and I would expect the same thing out of Washington Township, even though it's a long-term need, is that's where those funds would come from. That's why the district was created. They've had the ability to increase their funding both from local income tax and property taxes, as well as other funds that the townships had, and I think the responsibility for that rests with them. If we have to build a new fire station in the city, we have to borrow money, and we have to pay for that. We don't go to the county and ask them to give us dollars. So that's my two cents there. With the other comment I would make is just a comment that Chief Dillard made is they don't have updated costs. So even if this committee would recommend that funding is. There's no guarantee that they're going to have enough money to fund that station. So you would be giving them dollars that they might have to come back again or look for other funding sources. So I think it would be important to have updated construction dollars, given what we're seeing in the market. I don't think that there will be sufficient funds to build it, even with what they're asking for. So that's my comments. Thank you for letting me have some time.
All right, thanks, Mr. Underwood. This does remind me that we should go to the public to see if there's any public comment on this issue. Let me just ask, are there any questions before we go to, just clarifying questions before we go to the public? Yes, Councilor McKim.
I guess, and maybe this could come in public testimony as well, but I'm interested in the answer to the question about change in construction costs. What happens if the construction costs are 10% more than he's assuming? I guess I'd like to hear, I think it's a legitimate question. Is there a plan for that? If we appropriate, if they ultimately get this money, will that fire station definitely be built?
Chief Dillard, can you speak to that?
Yeah, so specifically to that question, it's really not much different than the rate calculations that you were talking about a little bit ago with the PSAP. There are unknowns. I can tell you at the time that this building was bid, I would expect those costs to be right at that area or slightly under.
And when was it bid?
End of 2021.
Right.
I have a significant background in construction. So I know Mr. Underwood knows numbers, but I know this stuff as well, and that's probably a pretty accurate figure.
In 2023?
Correct. You got to understand, at the end of 2021, construction costs were astronomical because of supply chain issues with lumber and building materials. A lot of that has corrected itself. I mean, sheet of plywood at that time was around $80. It's $40 now, so.
All right, thank you. All right, if there are no other questions, let's go to the public. Is there any member of the public who would like to speak about the, the tax rate for the public safety answering point, central dispatch, and/or the consideration of Monroe Fire Protection District's request? And Mr. Lucas, can you make the announcement for anybody on Zoom?
I don't see any members of the public on Zoom. I will note we've got two attorneys from the county legal department here, so I don't know if they had anything to add to the discussion, but they should both be able to unmute if needed.
Anybody from the public wish to comment? Going once, going twice. All right, well, we'll come back to the committee then for further discussion, and then we might move to a motion. Before any motion is made, is there any other further feedback or discussion of the QSP application? Councilmember Oldham.
I would really like to know this. I think this is something that we've talked about for years. I think clearly you can show a demonstrable need in that area. However, I believe this committee gave directions to the other QSPs that we would only fund immediate urgent needs. So did we dissuade the other ones from applying for funding where we're going to allow this one to go through that's been on the table for, by all discussions here, multiple years? Again, there are other avenues, either through reserves or through borrowing, to get to the same end result. Again, guys, I would really like to see us do this, but that's not the ground rules we all agreed to or we laid out for everybody else. I know there are other people mean qualified service providers that have needs, but they did not come to us because they did not deem them immediate or urgent. And we said up front, that's all we were funding. So unfortunately, on this time, because of the rules we laid, I'm going to have to say no to this.
Councilmember Sims?
Thank you. I just really want to say I agree with what our controller, Mr. Underwood, said earlier, and my colleague, Mr. Scott Oldham. I also do, meaning that I'm not so sure their request is the best way to come through PSLIT funding. So that's my position. But I do want to say this. I listened very intently to my colleague Deckert, Councilman Deckert, and his need for Washington Township, in particularly Dittamore Road. So I feel for that. I agree with that, and I understand that. My difference is just funding, the funding mechanism. And I think it looks to me, and I'm not an accountant, but it looks to me that the 226.7 is well within their budgeting or their cumulative funds and all that I'm looking at. So I'll just, and again, what Councilmember Oldham, Town Council Oldham says, this is not an emergency. I remember when we funded self-contained breathing units because it needed. I mean, that was something, and we don't want anyone to be unsafe. This has been going on for a couple years, and building fire district fire stations was not my idea or understanding of how we decided some time ago to use these funds. So that's my position there, and it's just my comment on as a member of this committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor McKim?
Yeah, so I will have to disagree with my distinguished colleagues from the city and from the town on this committee. I believe that the needs have been demonstrated to be immediate and urgent. Urgent doesn't have to mean that the building is literally burning down or people are dying right now, but it does mean that it sounds like if this is not funded, this could be a multi-year delay in getting an essential piece of public safety infrastructure built. So I have no problem at all stating that or agreeing that those needs are immediate and urgent. Also, the public safety or the income tax is paid countywide, so I think we should look at, and we are, this whole process allows us to look at investments countywide, not necessarily whether they're part of one jurisdiction or another, but whether they serve the public safety of the community. And so I'm still going to, despite the arguments of Mr. Alderman, Mr. Sims, and Mr. Underwood, I'm still going to support, and I hope that at least some folks on the city will support this request as well.
Councilmember Sandberg?
I will find myself in support of my county colleagues with this one. I have had some major disagreements with some of the decisions that were made at the city level with regard to public safety regarding both police and fire. And I think we are all responsible for living within our means and what our budget will allow. I think there have been some missteps along the way. I hear things as I talk to various rank and file from the personnel that we can do a better job within the jurisdictions to provide better mutual aid and to be more looking at this as a comprehensive decision and not whose unit does this benefit. So I will be voting yes on the proposal to fund the Washington Township Fire Station. Thank you.
Shall we get a motion on the table?
I move that we recommend to the Income Tax Council that we fund the request from the Monroe Fire Protection District for the total requested amount of $226,700.
Second.
All right, there's a motion and a second. I'll take an opportunity to give my thoughts on this motion. I do feel that there is a need for this fire station. It's very clear. There has been a need for the new Washington Township Fire Station for decades. And given that situation, I know that the interstate has made some access to some parts more difficult, but I would agree with Town Council Member Oldham and my colleague Jim Sims about the urgent nature and the guidelines that we put forth, where item number 2 of the criteria says the committee will only consider funding expenditures for demonstrated urgent one-time emergency needs. And I don't feel that this request fits under that criteria. And as Mr. Oldham pointed out, this criterion may have led to some other service providers not even applying. I also feel that there are other avenues to get this new fire station built as soon as possible. Most of the time when local government or any level of government builds a new structure, there is a loan involved. So I would encourage the Fire Protection District to investigate getting a loan for the needed funds and moving ahead expeditiously. I just don't think that this is the appropriate source of funding for this important need in our greater community. Are there other comments before we move to a vote on the motion? Yes, Mr. Carter.
So I know I don't have a vote in this matter. However, I do support this. As a former firefighter at Beam-Blossom Township and a former fire chief at Beam-Blossom Township, I know firsthand what it's like to be up in that northern part of the area of the county and have to wait for more help to come. So while we're talking that this just strictly helps Washington Township, it actually helps all of the northern part of the county. It'll help Beam-Blossom Township, it'll help Steinsville, it'll help Benton Township. And to disagree with what Mr. Underwood said, this will benefit the city of Bloomington too, because as Chief Dillard said, the northern part of I-69, pretty much the only department that has access to it right now is Bloomington City Station 2, which will relieve some of their calls to where they can stay in their station in their area. And I just think it'll benefit more than just the citizens of Washington Township. You know, it'll benefit all of the northern part of the county, and it'll just help other fire departments in that area, like Steinsville and Beam-Blossom Township. So I don't have a vote in this. I wish I did, but I support it.
Thank you, Mr. Carter. Are there other comments before we take a vote? All right. Mr. Lucas, could you help us out by doing a roll call vote, please?
Yes, happily. Committee Member Sandberg?
Yes.
Oldham? Oh, apologies. I don't know why I'm going all over the place. McKim?
Yes.
Piedmont Smith?
No.
Deckard?
Yes.
Sims?
No.
That vote is 3-3, and so the motion does not pass. And is there any other motion in regards to this application? Okay. We can then move on to item 4C on the agenda, PSLIT tax rate for 2024. We heard previously that the finance staff from both county and city recommend that we keep the rates the same, given that we don't know what the revenues will be, and that we have, given also the fact that we have reserves that can make up the difference between what was provided from PSLIT last year and what PSAP is requesting this year. But are there comments or any motions? I guess we don't really need a vote. Is that right, Mr. Lucas? Unless we want to change the rates.
Unless there's a motion to change the rate, then no further action is needed by the tax council. And so it might make sense to put on the record for this meeting that the committee is recommending leaving the rate where it is. That's not an action the tax council will need to take, though. But if that's the will of this committee, it might make sense to at least state that on the record.
So moved.
All right, so we have a motion on the table to maintain the same rates for PSAP as last year.
Second.
Thank you. Any further discussion on this item? Is there any member of the public who would like to comment on the rates of the PSLIT that will go to the public safety answering point? The remainder will then, we expect, go to the county, the city of Bloomington, the town of Ellettsville, and the town of Steinsville. All right, seeing no comments, Mr. Lucas, could you do another roll call vote, please?
Yes, Committee Member Sandberg,
Yes.
McKim,
Yes.
Piedmont Smith,
Yes.
Deckard,
Yes.
Sims,
Yes.
and Oldham.
And that passes 6-0. So then we come to matter of schedule. I don't know, Mr. Lucas, if there's anything to say there?
Nope, that was just a placeholder in case we needed to hold an emergency Monday meeting. But you all got through the work this year without normal information, so thank you for your efforts. Hopefully we'll get some help from the state for next year's process. This was a recent change in state law that forced us to accelerate our timeline, so we'll continue to talk to folks and see what can be done in the future.
So since we're not recommending any change in rates, will any legislation come before the county council, the town council, and the city council?
Historically, the City Council has been the only member of the Tax Council to act on the recommendations of the PSLIT Committee because of the number of votes the City Council has. So with the committee's recommendations or lack thereof today, I don't anticipate any legislation coming to the City Council for action.
Okay. All right, well, thank you all for your participation today, and those from the Monroe Fire Protection District and Central Dispatch and from City Legal and County Legal who were on call today. I appreciate everybody's participation, and we are adjourned.